if you've been watching my videos for a while, who would you guess my favorite Fallout character is? Mr. House? Maximus? Both fine guesses, but what if I told you it's actually someone I've barely mentioned?
So, who are you, Nick?
That's a question I've been trying to figure out myself for a long damn time.
The Nick Valentine video that I have been hyping up in my head for far too long is upon us. There is no way it will possibly live up to what I imagined it could be, but it's gonna be what it is. Let's go. Today we're gonna talk about Nick Valentine, and what it is I think is so special about his story that I think everyone should listen to. Nick Valentine is not the original Nick Valentine. He doesn't even look like Nick Valentine as far as we know. But to explain all that, we first have to explain the Institute.
Well, they're the boogeymen of the Commonwealth. Something goes wrong, everyone blames them.
Quick recap, in Fallout 4's Commonwealth, the ruins of pre-war Boston, the Institute is a top-secret scientific organization beneath the ruins of CIT, Fallout's equivalent of MIT. The Institute is known and feared for creating synths, artificial people built to imitate, replace, or possibly surpass human beings.
I will not serve a synth pretending to be human.
Everyone in town is afraid of being replaced, or that someone they know isn't human anymore.
Why would you think I'm a synth?
Why wouldn't I? A synth looks just like a person, with hair and sweat and blood and everything. So, are you human or not?
So there's a lot of paranoia about synths. Sneaking around, replacing their loved ones, even anxieties about being a synth and not knowing it.
I'm not their daughter. I'm a synth.
The Nick Valentine we meet in the game is not one of the newer bioengineered synths. He's one of their early prototypes.
I know I'm a synth, authentic Institute handiwork, but I'm still mechanical, not bioengineered like the fancy synths giving everyone the willies these days. My memories, my personality, they're all lifted from some cop who volunteered for an experiment back before the war.
You see, before the war, the Institute scanned the brain of a Boston detective, and then many years later, transferred his personality data onto this more mechanical synth prototype hardware. That detective was none other than Nick Valentine.
My entire life, I owed a Nick.
And that, my friends, is how you end up with an old, weathered, prototype Institute synth who answers to the name of Nick Valentine. From his perspective, that's whose memories he's got, and that's the human narrative that he identifies with, so he may not be the Nick Valentine, but he isn't anyone else either.
Everything that makes me who I am, my judgment, my speech, hell, even my name, they're his. And I can't do a damn thing about it, because without them, I'm nothing. A shell.
And now it's time for Lindsay's on-camera vanity tangent.
Hi! Excuse me. So sorry.
I feel like to do Nick's story justice, I want to establish a shared lens on the concept of ego. In the past, when I was talking about Maximus and talking about the ego, I've talked about how the word usually doesn't come up unless it's in some sort of a negative context. Like if someone's ego is taking up more space than it should, like when somebody's being egotistical, or egocentric, or egomaniacal. The thing is, ego is not only a neutral concept, but it's a necessary one. From a psychological standpoint, your ego is a collection of processes related to your identity, your beliefs, and your concerns. And on the spiritual side of things, ego is a construction. It's a conceptual abstraction that houses your name, your social role, your status, and all things pertaining to your identity. Like, your psychological ego asks, how am I me? And your spiritual ego asks, but why am I me? Your identity is the content, and your ego is your relationship with that content. The most important thing when it comes to discussing ego is to keep value judgments out of the conversation, because they are so distracting, because the ego is fucking obsessed with seeing itself as good. This is a core human truth that has a monumental impact on politics. So if you judge any trait as bad, as not good, it is nearly impossible for your ego to recognize when you possess it. Because you're good and it's not good, you can't be that. You will turn reality inside out. You know what I'm talking about? You've watched other people do it, you know you have. But if we don't recognize that we possess a trait, then we're obviously not going to do anything about it. We are not moved to change those things whose reality we deny. Ego identification might sound like a redundant term, but when I say that, I mean it in a very specific way. It's when people conflate an abstraction with their selfhood so strongly that they will enlist their survival responses to defend it, like they're defending their own life. Like, have you ever gotten really mad and really defensive when somebody said something about you that wasn't true? Your nervous system feels under threat, but you're not really under any physical threat. An idea about you is under threat. And yes, absolutely, these things can become real threats. The feeling isn't invalid. I mean, there's a reason why the brain does this. It's just wise to recognize that it is a different kind of threat. That's why it's so important when discussing ego to try to bring value judgments out of the conversation, because you're going to protect yourself from seeing certain things as if you're protecting your very life, even though you're not really. The less you apply value judgments, the more you can plainly, clearly see what's happening. So when we talked about Maximus and ego, we talked a lot about how his power armor often symbolizes his ego and his negotiation with his ego, how he's often confronted with who he is without it. However, the power armor, it isn't demonized. We want to see him fight and do badass things in badass power armor, but all the times that we see him fight on even without it are still really important and meaningful and powerful, because it reminds us that it is a tool that he is using, but he isn't nothing without it. The more that we're able to see our ego as something separate, as something that we choose, as something that we hone, as something that we use, that's where agency comes from, that's where autonomy comes from. The objective with ego is not to conquer it, or rise above it, or even transcend it. It's to have agency over it, ownership of it. And for the love of God, do not let manipulators or exploiters do that work for you. They are unfit for that job. And I can think of very few fictional characters that capture the vulnerability and triumph of claiming ownership of your own identity and ego, quite like Nick Valentine. Funky Death Claw reminding you to like and subscribe. Like and subscribe! By the time we meet Nick, he's had plenty of time to process which of his memories are actually his and which aren't.
It's all pretty hazy from back then, but now and then I get glimpses.
His early Institute memories are fragmented, but clearly traumatic. We know he was kept isolated. He says a single test chamber was his whole world for years. We know he was constantly watched. He remembers being an experiment. Eventually, he woke up on the other side and realized the Institute had cut him loose.
Don't know why they chose to make a robot based on some pre-war cop. Maybe that's why the Institute tossed me in the garbage.
He remembers waking up in a garbage heap, physically damaged, with a head full of memories belonging to a man who had been dead for 200 years.
Suffice to say, it was a confusing couple of weeks.
I think it would be fair to say that Nick was handed, as they say, a shit deal. He's got the mind pattern of a detective from a world that no longer exists. He looks like a terrifying robot zombie, torn skin dangling off of a frickin' Terminator skeleton. He feels like a person, but sure does not look like one. Nope, not at all. Of course, people are terrified of him.
Folks didn't really know much about synths back then, so when I finally ran into people, they mostly treated me with caution rather than hostility. But the kids, they weren't afraid.
His first positive contact with human beings came from a small settlement and a kid named Jim, the first person to talk to him.
Once they'd seen I wasn't going to hurt anyone, the other folks in the neighborhood came out to ogle the mechanical man. It eventually turned into a pretty swell soiree. A local mechanic even gave me a once-over, free of charge. Those people, they treated me like a human being. I've been trying to return the favor ever since.
We can ask him if he ever went back to that settlement, and he tells us they had apparently been wiped out by raiders, which is so sad. That would have been a cute little quest. But eventually he did get to Diamond City, the most thriving settlement in the Commonwealth.
Thank goodness I found Diamond City. It's got its flaws, sure, but it beats the hell out of anywhere else in the Commonwealth.
But by this time, fear of synths was intense because of what came to be known as the Broken Mask Incident. It went down like this. A man by the name of Carter came to the Power Noodle Central Diamond City bar, and it seemed normal at first, but then suddenly opened fire in the market. Normal for the wasteland, not so normal for Power Noodles. After security took him down, they noticed that parts of his face were made of mechanical components, hence Broken Mask. This is how people found out that synths could look human.
When I took up there back when, people were just as scared of the Institute as they are now. Maybe more. The massacre of the CPG was still pretty fresh in people's minds at that point.
Massacre of the CPG? What's that?
The Commonwealth Provisional Government.
The CPG was an attempt by Commonwealth settlements to form a shared government, like people do. But according to local legend, the Institute sent a synth who murdered, death, killed every representative who showed.
The Commonwealth Provisional Government was over before it even got off the ground.
So Nick came to this city during a time when exposed robot parts was not a good look. But miraculously, he rose above that. In the end, they let him stay because he rescued the mayor's teenage daughter. The mayor at the time was Henry Roberts. His daughter had run off with a caravan hand who turned out to be a part of a kidnapping gang. Don't talk to strangers, kids.
I took her home and the mayor dubbed me a hero, offered me a place in town. Lots of folks protested, said I was a spy, but he wouldn't have it.
He made himself useful doing repair and handyman work for a while, until people started asking him to find missing people or solve domestic disappearances. The jobs piled up, and Nick the Synth became Nick the Detective, and Valentine's Detective Agency was born, and became an established and respected Diamond City business.
It took me a long time to realize that home is where you make it.
Doesn't change that the Institute is one of the primary reasons people go missing to begin with, though. After Broken Mask, synths weren't just the boogeyman of public imagination anymore. They were a legitimate infiltration threat. Artificial people who could just sit beside you, earn your trust, and then destroy your community from the inside.
Missing people means the Institute is involved.
Nick always believed that the Institute discarded him because he was a failed or obsolete prototype. They must have made him, tested him, copied a dead man into him, then tossed him in the garbage when he didn't suit their needs, whatever those were.
They really just threw you away?
Sure did. It was quite the rude awakening.
But Dima has another story. We meet Dima in Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC. He's a modified synth and co-founder of Acadia, a safe haven for runaway synths, and he claims to be something like Nick's brother.
Nick? It can't be you.
Don't give me that. What are you trying to pull?
Nick and Dima were apparently the only two prototype synths of their kind, the first synths capable of independent thinking and judgment, with one pivotal difference. Dima was allowed to develop his personality through experience, like a real boy. Nick's personality, on the other hand, was transferred from a human being. It was programmed, not earned. According to Dima, the process took several attempts. He saw Nick wake up repeatedly, not knowing who or what he was, consistent with Nick's fragmented memories. But what Nick doesn't remember is Dima, or Dima's claim that he helped Nick escape.
If I were your brother, I'd remember.
That's where you'd be wrong. This happened over a century ago.
So what does all this have to do with ego? Something that fascinates me about Nick Valentine is he could easily say, I'm a human being in a synth body. I mean, why not? From his perspective, he was a flesh and blood private dick, and then his body changed into that of a broken robot. But he doesn't conceptualize himself that way.
I remember getting the call to head to some lab in Cambridge to get that neurotrans whatever. And the next thing I know, I'm in a trash heap. My family, my home, my entire life gone. Then I discover all those things that they weren't even mine. Everything I ever was belonged to Nick.
He's not ego-identified with his memories or the narrative of his history the way most of us are. And that's pretty wild, because he lives in a world where being a synth makes people treat him like a threat, a tool, or a fake person. So it would be way easier on the ego to say, no, I'm really human. I just woke up like this, having a bad skin decade. But no, Synth Nick describes the original as an entirely different person.
Nick was a hell of a cop. A guy with good instincts and a good heart. I always counted myself lucky they didn't load me up with some ex-con.
He's grateful that he got the personality of a good one. He also experiences flashes of the original Nick's life, old cases, old loves, places he's never been, people who've been dead for centuries. But since the body he's currently living in didn't have those experiences, he doesn't consider them his. That means he has to look at his own memories, his own personality, his own instincts, speech patterns, judgment, and his name as belonging to someone else. Which begs the question, what is his, then? What is the line between our real identity and a phony identity that was given to us? Nick is compelled to confront this question when deciding what he's going to do about Eddie Winter.
He was a bad man who did a lot of bad things.
Eddie Winter was a pre-war organized crime figure, and Nick finds out he sealed himself in a shelter and allegedly turned himself into a ghoul to survive the apocalypse.
Eddie Winter went and turned himself into a ghoul 200 years before it was fashionable. And I'm convinced that he's still locked inside that shelter, safe and sound.
Now, back in the day, Winter killed someone who Nick remembers as his girl. Granted, this is with another man's memories, but he remembers all the same.
I don't get it, Nick. Why kill Eddie Winter, even if he is still alive?
I've got memories of a girl. My girl. They're not really my memories, I know that. They're Nick's. But the girl, she was real. She was beautiful and innocent, and Winter killed her.
And even though he didn't really experience that loss firsthand, he is absolutely feeling the anger and the heartbreak, and feels an authentic, sincere duty to find and kill Winter, as if it were his own vendetta. And he's moving forward fully acknowledging that these memories and this burden aren't truly his. And that's not easy for him.
Because I was Nick Valentine. I had his memories, his fears, all that poor bastard's hope.
He feels stuck between gratitude and resentment. On one hand, Nick was a good dude, and his memories kept him alive, but they're also a constant reminder that he is not the person he thinks and feels he is.
That I'm not a person at all.
He desperately wants to be his own person, live his own story.
All I want is a life where I have something I can call my own.
And he most certainly will and is. I mean, the original Nick Valentine doesn't know what it's like to be a synth robot in the post-apocalypse. That's absolutely his story. But a fundamental part of writing that story is deciding for himself what role Nick Valentine has in that story, and his capacity for doing that with so much patience and kindness toward others is what I find so impressive and inspiring. Nick Valentine can't hide what he is. His springs and sprockets are exposed for everyone to see, but I don't think he would have it any other way. He has about as much interest in hiding the truth from other people as he does in hiding it from himself. Zilch. His old world detective values have taught him to look at the truth, no matter how unpleasant it might be. I'm pretty sure that in his book that the way other people see him is their business. He's far more concerned with how he feels about himself. Nick's core wound is that his ego avatar, that lets him function in the world as a person, came from someone else. But is that really so different from the rest of us? How many things about our identity were assigned to us? Our name, our heritage, our family? Blood is real, but a bloodline is a social construct. Just like nationality, or citizenship, or class. And increasingly, we're seeing gender in these conversations. That doesn't mean that none of this stuff matters, and that's where people get confused. They hear that this stuff is a social construct, and they think, oh, it's imaginary, it's arbitrary, it doesn't matter. But that's silly. I mean, we could say all day that money is a construct, but it obviously matters. If enough people are on board with an idea, it has real power. It's important to recognize when things are assigned abstractions so that you can proactively choose how you relate to them. True agency means choosing, not rejecting, not aimless rebellion. Just because something was given to you doesn't mean it's not yours. That is the lesson of Nick. Nick Valentine's story reminds us to examine the identity that we were given. We were all programmed with cultural standards, with language, so many things that we might not even realize we don't have to take for granted. And we don't have control and we don't have a choice over a lot of things that build us, but we absolutely can choose how we relate to those things. If Synth Nick truly feels pre-war Nick's loss and heartbreak, he's gonna have to decide how he relates to that experience, and how he's gonna relate to a society that has every reason to never accept him. And I don't know about you, y'all, but if I make it through this life with a fraction of this man's strength of character, that'll be good enough for me. Community section for the Feral Cools, and I really hope that video was awesome. It better be. Please let that video be awesome. Fun fact, my other channel, Dinstopia, the original sort of launch plan for that channel was I was gonna have 3 epic, glorious documentaries. First one being the story of Benny and House, the second one being the Johnny Silverhand video, and the third one was going to be the Nick Valentine video. Things sort of started to shake out differently, and I was like, I just have to unburden myself of the Nick Valentine video, because there's other things to make videos about. But if you want to come talk to me about it, come to the stream Saturday, June 27th. And if you haven't heard, there is a Feral Cools Discord now, and after every stream, I post a 24-hour link in the description of that stream. I do stream every Saturday, for the time being. I'm talking a lot more about the future plans for my content in this channel. I'm trying to be more of an adult. I've been trying to be more of an adult for 20 years, but this time I'm serious, I think, I hope. But yeah, come to the stream and join the Discord if you want to stay up to date on all of the things. Stay cool, ferals.